Dark plottings at Blandings Castle. At the open window of the great library of Blandings Castle, drooping like a wet sock, as was his habit when he had nothing to prop his spine against, the Earl of Emsworth, that amiable and bone-headed peer, stood gazing out over his domain. It was a lovely morning. The air was fragrant with gentle summer scents. Yet in his lordship's pale blue eyes there was a look of melancholy. His brow was furrowed, his mouth peevish, and this was all the more strange in that he was normally as happy as only a fluffy-minded man with excellent health and a large income can be. A writer, describing Blandings Castle in a magazine article, had once said, "Tiny mosses have grown in the cavities of the stones until, viewed near at hand, the place seems shaggy with vegetation." He would not have been a bad description of the proprietor. 50-odd years of serene and unruffled placidity had given Lord Emsworth a curiously moss-covered look. Very few things had the power to disturb him. Even his younger son, the Honourable Freddie Threepwood, could only do it occasionally. Yet now he was sad. And not to make a mystery of it any longer, the reason of his sorrow was the fact that he had mislaid his glasses, and without them he was blind, to use his own neat simile, as a bat. He was keenly aware of the sunshine that poured down on his gardens, and was yearning to pop out and potter among the flowers he loved. But no man, pop he never so wisely, can hope to potter with any good result if the world is a mere blur. The door behind him opened, and Beach, the butler, entered, a dignified procession of one. "Who's that?" inquired Lord Emsworth, spinning on his axis. "It is I, your lordship, Beach." "Have you found them?" "Not yet, your lordship," sighed the butler. "You can't have looked." "I have searched assiduously, your lordship, but without avail. Thomas and Charles also announce non-success. Stokes has not yet made his report." "Ah!" "I am redispatching Thomas and Charles to your lordship's bedroom," said the master of the hunt. "I trust that their efforts will be rewarded." Beach withdrew, and Lord Emsworth turned to the window again. The scene that spread itself beneath him, though he was unfortunately not able to see it, was a singularly beautiful one, for the castle, which is one of the oldest inhabited houses in England, stands upon a knoll of rising ground at the southern end of the celebrated Vale of Blandings in the county of Shropshire. Away in the blue distance, wooded hills ran down to where the Severn gleamed like an unsheathed sword, while up from the river rolling parkland, mounting and dipping, surged in a green wave almost to the castle walls, breaking on the terraces in a many-coloured flurry of flowers as it reached the spot where the province of Angus McAllister, his lordship's head gardener, began. The day being June the 30th, which is the very high tide time of summer flowers, the immediate neighbourhood of the castle was ablaze with roses, pinks, pansies, carnations, hollyhocks, columbines, larkspurs, London pride, Canterbury wells, and a multitude of other choice blooms of which only Angus could have told you the names. A conscientious man was Angus, and in spite of being a good deal hampered by Lord Emsworth's amateur assistance, he showed excellent results in his department. In his beds there was much at which to point with pride, little to view with concern. Scarcely had Beach removed himself when Lord Emsworth was called upon to turn again. The door had opened for a second time, and a young man in a beautifully cut suit of grey flannel was standing in the doorway. He had a long and vacant face, topped by shining hair brushed back and heavily brilliantined after the prevailing mode, and he was standing on one leg, for Freddie Threepwood was seldom completely at his ease in his parents' presence. "Hello, Governor." "Well, Frederick?" It would be paltering with the truth to say that Lord Emsworth's greeting was a warm one. It lacked the note of true affection. A few weeks before, he had had to pay a matter of £500 to settle certain racing debts for his offspring. And while this had not actually dealt an irretrievable blow at his bank account, it had undeniably tended to diminish Freddie's charm in his eyes. "I hear you lost your glasses, Governor." "That is so." "Nuisance, what?" "Undeniably." "Ought to have a spare pair." "I've broken my spare pair." "Oh, tough luck. Lost the other?" "And as you say, lost the other." "Have you looked for the belly things?" "I have." "Must be somewhere, I mean." "Quite possibly." "Where?" asked Freddie, warming to his work. "Did you see them last?" "Go away," said Lord Emsworth, on whom his child's conversation had begun to exercise an oppressive effect. "Eh?" "Go away." "Go away?" "Yes, go away." "Right-ho." The door closed. His lordship returned to the window once more. He'd been standing there some few minutes when one of those miracles occurred which happen in libraries. Without sound or warning, a section of books started to move away from the parent body, and swinging out in a solid chunk into the room showed a glimpse of a small study-like apartment. A young man in spectacles came noiselessly through, and the books returned to their place. The contrast between Lord Emsworth and the newcomer, as they stood there, was striking, almost dramatic. Lord Emsworth was so acutely spectacleless. Rupert Baxter, his secretary, so pronouncedly spectacled. It was his spectacles that struck you first as you saw the man. They gleamed efficiently at you. If you had a guilty conscience, they pierced you through and through, and even if your conscience was 100% pure, you could not ignore them. Here, you said to yourself, is an efficient young man in spectacles. In describing Rupert Baxter as efficient, you did not overestimate him. He was essentially that. Technically but a salaried subordinate, he had become by degrees, owing to the limp amiability of his employer, the real master of the house. He was the brains of Blandings, the man at the switch, the person in charge, and the pilot, so to speak, who weathered the storm. Lord Emsworth left everything to Baxter, only asking to be allowed to potter in peace. And Baxter, more than equal to the task, shouldered it without wincing. Having got within range, Baxter coughed. And Lord Emsworth, recognising the sound, wheeled round with a faint flicker of hope. It might be that even this apparently insoluble problem of the missing pince-nez would yield before the other's efficiency. "Baxter, my dear fellow, I've lost my glasses. My glasses! I have mislaid them. I cannot think where they can have gone to. You haven't seen them anywhere by chance?" "Yes, Lord Emsworth," replied the secretary, quietly equal to the crisis. "They are hanging down your back." "Down my back? Why, bless my soul!" His lordship tested the statement and found it, like all Baxter's statements, accurate. "Why, bless my soul, so they are. Do you know, Baxter, I really believe I must be growing absent-minded." He hauled in the slack, secured the pince-nez, adjusted them beamingly. His irritability had vanished like the dew off one of his roses. "Thank you, Baxter, thank you. You are invaluable." And with a radiant smile, Lord Emsworth made buoyantly for the door, en route for God's Air and the Society of McAllister. The movement drew from Baxter another cough, a sharp, peremptory cough this time, and his lordship paused, reluctantly, like a dog whistled back from the chase. A cloud fell over the sunniness of his mood. Admirable as Baxter was in so many respects, he had a tendency to worry him at times, and something told Lord Emsworth that he was going to worry him now. "The car will be at the door," said Baxter with quiet firmness, "at 2 sharp. "Car? What car?" "The car to take you to the station." "Station? What station?" Rupert Baxter preserved his calm. There were times when he found this employer a little trying, but he never showed it. "You have perhaps forgotten, Lord Emsworth, that you arranged with Lady Constance to go to London this afternoon." "Go to London?" gasped Lord Emsworth, appalled. "In weather like this, with 1,000 things to attend to in the garden? What a perfectly preposterous notion! Why should I go to London? I hate London." "You arranged with Lady Constance that you would give Mr. McTodd lunch tomorrow at your club." "Who the devil is Mr. McTodd?" "The well-known Canadian poet." "Never heard of him." "Lady Constance has long been a great admirer of his work. She wrote inviting him, should he ever come to England, to pay a visit to Blandings. He is now in London and is to come down tomorrow for 2 weeks. Lady Constance's suggestion was that, as a compliment to Mr. McTodd's eminence in the world of literature, you should meet him in London and bring him back here yourself." Lord Emsworth remembered now. He also remembered that his positively infernal scheme had not been his sister Constance's in the first place. It was Baxter who had made the suggestion, and Constance had approved. He made use of the recovered pince-nez to glower through them at his secretary, and not for the first time in recent months was aware of a feeling that this fellow Baxter was getting above himself, throwing his weight about, making himself a confounded nuisance. He wished he could get rid of the man. But where could he find an adequate successor? That was the trouble. With all his drawbacks, Baxter was efficient. Lord Emsworth toyed with the pleasant dream of dismissing him, and it is possible, such was his exasperation, that he might on this occasion have done something practical in that direction, had not the library door at this moment opened for the 3rd time to admit yet another intruder, at the sight of whom his lordship's militant mood faded weakly. "Oh, hello, Connie," he said guiltily, like a small boy caught in the jam cupboard. Somehow his sister always had this effect upon him. Of all those who had entered the library that morning, the new arrival was the best worth looking at. Lord Emsworth was tall and lean and scraggy. Rupert Baxter, thick-set and handicapped by that vaguely grubby appearance which is presented by swarthy young men of bad complexion. And even Beach, though dignified, and Freddie, though slim, would never have got far in a beauty competition. But Lady Constance Keble really took the eye. She was a strikingly handsome woman in the middle 40s. She had a fair, broad brow, teeth of a perfect, even whiteness, and the carriage of an empress. Her eyes were large and grey and gentle, and incidentally misleading, because gentle was hardly the adjective which anybody who knew her would have applied to Lady Constance. Though genial enough when she got her way, on the rare occasions when people attempted to thwart her, she was apt to comport herself in a manner reminiscent of Cleopatra on one of the latter's bad mornings. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," said Lady Constance, with a bright smile. "I just came in to tell you to be sure not to forget, Clarence, that you're going to London this afternoon to meet Mr. McTodd." "I was just telling Lord Emsworth," said Baxter, "that the car would be at the door at 2. "Thank you, Mr. Baxter. Of course, I might have known that you'd not forget. You're so wonderfully capable. I don't know what in the world we would do without you." The efficient Baxter bowed, but though gratified, he was not overwhelmed by the tribute. The same thought had often occurred to him independently. "If you'll excuse me," he said, "I have one or two things to attend to." "Certainly, Mr. Baxter." The efficient one withdrew through the door in his bookshelf. He realised that his employer was in fractious mood, and he knew that he was leaving him in capable hands. Lord Emsworth turned from the window, out of which he had been gazing with a plaintive detachment. "Look here, Connie," he grumbled feebly. "You know I hate literary fellows. It's bad enough having them in the house, but when it comes to going to London to fetch 'em—" He shuffled morosely. It was a perpetual grievance of his, this practice of his sister's of collecting literary celebrities and dumping them down in the home for indeterminate visits. You never knew when she was going to spring another one on you. Already, since the beginning of the year, he had suffered from around a dozen of the species at brief intervals, and at this very moment his life was being poisoned by the fact that Blandings was sheltering a certain Miss Aileen Peavy, the mere thought of whom was enough to turn the sunshine off as with a tap. "I can't stand literary fellows," proceeded his lordship. "Never could. And by Jove, literary females are worse. Miss Peavy—" Here words temporarily failed the owner of Blandings. "Miss Peavy," he resumed after an eloquent pause. "Who is Miss Peavy?" "My dear Clarence," replied Lady Constance tolerantly, for the fine morning had made her mild and amiable, "if you do not know that Aileen is one of the leading poetesses of the younger school, you must be very ignorant." I don't mean that. I know she writes poetry, but I mean, who is she? You suddenly produced her here like a rabbit out of a hat," said his lordship, in a tone of strong resentment. "Where did you find her?" "I first made Aileen's acquaintance on an Atlantic liner when Joe and I were coming back from our trip around the world. She was very kind to me when I was feeling the motion of the vessel. If you mean what is her family, though, I think Aileen told me once that she was connected with the Rutlandshire Peavies." "Never heard of them," snapped Lord Emsworth. "And if they're anything like Miss Peavy, God help Rutlandshire." Tranquil as Lady Constance's mood was this morning, an ominous stoniness came into her grey eyes at these words, and there's little doubt that in another instant she would have discharged at her mutinous brother one of those shattering comebacks for which she had been celebrated in the family from nursery days onward. But at this juncture the efficient Baxter appeared again through the bookshelf. "Excuse me," said Baxter, securing attention with a flash of his spectacles. "I forgot to mention, Lord Emsworth, that to suit everybody's convenience, I have arranged that Miss Halliday shall call to see you at your club tomorrow after lunch." "Good Lord, Baxter!" The harassed peer started as if he had been bitten in the leg. "Who's Miss Halliday? Not another literary female?" "Miss Halliday is the young lady who is coming to Blandings to catalogue the library." "Catalogue the library? What's it want cataloguing for?" "It has not been done since the year 1885. "Well, look how splendidly we've got along without it," said Lord Emsworth acutely. "Don't be so ridiculous, Clarence," said Lady Constance, annoyed. "The catalogue of a great library like this must be brought up to date." She moved to the door. "I do wish you would try to wake up and take an interest in things. If it wasn't for Mr. Baxter, I don't know what would happen." And with a beaming glance of approval at her ally, she left the room. Baxter, coldly austere, returned to the subject under discussion. "I have written to Miss Halliday suggesting 2:30 as a suitable hour for the interview." "But look here—" "You will wish to see her before definitely confirming the engagement." "Yes, but look here, I wish you wouldn't go tying me up with all these appointments." I thought that as you were going to London to meet Mr. McTodd—" "But I'm not going to London to meet Mr. McTodd," cried Lord Emsworth with weak fury. "It's out of the question. I can't possibly leave Blandings. The weather may break at any moment. I don't want to miss a day of it." "The arrangements all are made." "Oh, send the fellow a wire. Unavoidably detained." "I could not take the responsibility for such a course myself," said Baxter coldly. "But possibly if you were to make the suggestion to Lady Constance—" "Oh, dash it," said Lord Emsworth unhappily, at once realising the impossibility of the scheme. "Oh, well, if I've got to go, I've got to go," he said after a gloomy pause. "But to leave my garden and stew in London at this time of the year—" There seemed nothing further to say on the subject. He took off his glasses, polished them, put them on again, and shuffled to the door. After all, he reflected, even though the car was coming for him at 2, at least he had the morning, and he proposed to make the most of it. But his first careless rapture at the prospect of pottering among his flowers was dimmed and would not be recaptured. He did not entertain any project so mad as the idea of defying his sister Constance, but he felt extremely bitter about the whole affair. Confound Constance! Dash Baxter! Miss Peavy! The door closed behind Lord Emsworth.